Labor Day is in the rear and hockey is near. Let's look back on the 5 things that define the Maple Leafs summer of 2025. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today to start planning your futures bets now. Hockey bets also now live on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. What's happening, Dave? How we feeling? The day after Labor Day, we're back in the saddle, pal. How we feeling?
Back in the saddle, and it's a little inching a little closer and closer, I know I can't. We're gonna have the rookie tournament coming up soon. I'm trying to remember the full details. I don't even think we've gotten the full details of that rookie tournament, but that's kind of the unofficial sign that hockey is coming close when that rookie tournament shows up.
Yeah, I believe I could have sworn they announced something a few days ago, didn't they? I thought I saw possibly that they announced maybe some of the players that were going to be there or the players that weren't going to be available. But yeah, so that'll be coming up in the next week or so for the tournament. So we're all obviously excited to see what some of the young players can do there. It's going to be different. Lots of turnover from the last couple of seasons, where I guess we've had guys like Grabenkin and Niemela and Fraser Minton and, Jared Cowan, Nick Robertson, was a staple for many years at this tournament, but we definitely won't see any of those players, but should see Easton Cowan, which I'm excited to see what he's got. Tyler Hopkins, who was the draft pick of the Maple Leafs this year in the 3rd round. Excited to see what he can bring to the Maple Leafs. And Ben Danford, who missed camp last year with an injury, he'll get an opportunity to take part in the rookie showcase tournament as well. So should be a lot of fun. And again, more details are set to come a little bit later in the week. So we will bring you those details when those become available to us. But Dave, the summer, or what we call the summer in hockey, post Labor Day, is here now. So the summer is over. We'll call it. Everyone's kind of getting back to work. We're back to school, and although we're not quite back to 5 days a week for shows for another couple of weeks here, it does feel like it's the start of a new season in a way. But we thought before we really get underway, before training camp gets here, a lot of people maybe checked out for the summer. So I think it makes some sense to maybe look back on the summer that was for the Maple Leafs, the off season that they had. And we're taking a look at the 5 defining moments of the Maple Leafs off season, the Maple Leafs summer of 2025. And when we were kind of prepping this and we're going back and forth, we realized how it was an eventful summer, man. Like a lot of things happened with the Maple Leafs. The difference in the makeup of the team, both on the ice and off the ice, since we last saw them against the Florida Panthers, vastly different.
Yeah, you almost had to do a recall of so what exactly things changed. Some people thought at least didn't really do much, but if you really narrow down on the things that did change, pretty significant. We're not talking about little subtle tweaks here and there. There were some big moves that did happen.
Well, and the number one, we'll get right into our list. The number one thing that defines the summer for the Maple Leafs is the departure of Mitch Marner, right? Mitch Marner getting dealt after the draft for Nicolas Roy, and in a sign and trade with the Vegas Golden Knights. And his departure was noisy for many reasons. I mean, obviously, there's the latest reason, the sit down he had with Mark Masters, and that kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, the way he threw the fan base under the bus. In a way, a lot of people thought it was kind of disingenuous. But also just the fact that Mitch Marner was a polarizing player in this market, on this team. And there were lots of people who did not want to see Mitch Marner go, felt that getting rid of Marner and not properly replacing him was going to hurt the team. And it remains to be seen. We'll see how things kind of play out. But you can't talk about this summer without discussing Mitch Marner and him no longer being the Toronto Maple Leaf.
It's going to be weird, right? I know, like, talking to some people, they're like, some people say, oh, they're still talking about Marner. They're still talking, like, time to move on, time to move on. Like, we're not talking about a middle six or bottom line. We're talking about a guy who was a top 5 pick for your team. It was
A
climbing.
franchise player. Like, the Leafs
Yeah.
had 2 franchise players. Like, I know Matthews gets all the glitz and glam and the limelight. He's got the captaincy. But, like, the Leafs had 2 franchise players, Marner and Matthews, and one of them is now gone. That's a big deal. Big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And I think people, I know there's a lot of Leafs fans that are just kind of sick and ready to move on. I get it, especially after that interview. There was a lot kind of said in the aftermath of it too, and the responses to it. And you're right. He's a polarizing player. And one thing, I look at the comments that people are making. It's just kind of the accountability wasn't really there, right? We talked about it, on the last show too. Like, after that negotiation in 2019, that's where things changed, because it kind of, it became clear that while he's a hometown player, there was, he certainly had his priorities on what he wanted. And in fairness, when you're a player of his caliber, you believe you're worth an amount, and you're going to do your best to get that value in your contract if you believe in what you're worth. But the fan base, especially when it comes to a player who is born in the city, grew up as a Leafs fan, right? They would kind of hope that Marner would encapsulate that a bit more, and it didn't. It just seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect ever since then.
Yeah. And he's no longer here, and we'll have to move forward, and it's going to have a ripple effect. And obviously, the Maple Leafs never officially filled the Mitch Marner role. They decided to attack it by committee, and those actions will be on our list a little bit later on, but that's what they decided to do. There wasn't one guy who they could go out and replace Mitch Marner. It's not really possible to do that. And we'll see how it all works out. We don't know. It could work, it could not. But that's why you got to play the games and find out. But certainly the whole Marner saga, that's the number one story that's still being talked about and will continue to be talked about all season long here in Toronto. All right, we'll take a break. We'll get to the final 4 things that defined the Maple Leafs summer of 2025. We'll get to those next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready to kick off with a can't-miss offer right now. New customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however I like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keep an eye on your fantasy lineup. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for all of this week, all of next week. And then by mid-September, we're back to 5 shows a week once training camp kicks off for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you can check out the podcast Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. And we are still on our road to 10K on YouTube. So subscribe. And once you get to 10K, we're giving away a Maple Leafs jersey. So let's try and get there as soon as we can. We'd like to get there by the All-Star break. We'd like to get there by All-Star, if not by playoffs, so we can give away a jersey to one of you loyal daily listeners here of the Locked On Leafs podcast. So we're going through the 5 defining moments of the Maple Leaf summer. A bit of a look back over the course of the last couple of months. Maybe some people checked out of the summer and are just kind of circling back now. So we thought, we'll just do a nice little look back and, put a bow on the summer in a way. And coming in at number 2 on our list of the defining moments of the summer for Toronto was the firing of Brendan Shanahan. Like that's one too that almost feels like it was forever ago and was not this summer, but it was. Brendan Shanahan was fired this summer. The Shanahan plan failed, and on May 23rd, the Leafs fired Brendan Shanahan and elected not to replace his role. Instead, they gave a little bit more responsibility to GM Brad Treliving, and then obviously the president of MLSE, Keith Pelly, will have a little bit more say in the ongoings of what happens on a day-to-day with the Toronto Maple Leafs, or maybe not day-to-day, but more so big picture with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the firing of Brendan Shanahan certainly comes in as the second biggest kind of off-season story that happened here in Toronto since the elimination by the Florida Panthers.
It's kind of interesting that we don't necessarily talk about that. Really, like we obviously talked about it in the moment, but like we don't hear that name anymore. It's almost like
we haven't brought up. I don't think we brought this up on the podcast since like May. Like,
and I know some people are like, it didn't technically happen. Something like it happened in the offs, like end of the season. Like,
right.
This was it was clear that this was the one thing that was going to kickstart everything that this team was going to be doing, right? Empowering, as you said, Brad Treliving to do what he felt was necessary to move this club forward, right? And it's kind of when you kind of put the two together, right? 1 and 2, Brendan Shanahan had always gone to bat for the core 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was always felt that the core 4 was something that Shanahan prided himself on, that core 4 was going to get the job done. It didn't get the job done. Well, guess what? It cost you your job, right? And so it's almost kind of poetic that following the Shanahan departure, Mitch Marner was the next one gone. It kind of just feels like those two were always kind of linked together in a certain way, because we know what Shanahan thought of the guy, the players on this team, and I'm sure Marner was one of those ones that he had to go to bat for probably many times, given how he didn't really perform when the stage was at his brightest. And Shanahan constantly said, well, they're going to get it done. They're going to get it done. In the end, they didn't get it done.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong about Shanny being one of the ones to really go to bat with Marner. And, he's the one who gave the sign off on the original contract that Mitch Marner was given back in 2019. And, yeah, who knows what would have happened, I guess, if he was still in charge as Marner went through contract negotiations here with the Maple Leafs. Could there have been something that could have been done with Shanny? Perhaps. But ultimately, they decided to go a different direction. And, they're just kind of changing the identity of the group, right? They want to be deeper. And the way to do that, well, they were too top heavy in terms of how they were paying their players. So they decided to spread the wealth a little bit. And again, to go back to Marner, we'll see how it works out. But the Shannon plan of we can and we will, building with the core 4, plan failed. They had nearly 10 years of the Shannon plan here, and it got them nothing. They won, 2 playoff rounds in 9 years. So I think a lot of us anticipated Shanahan being let go this summer after another year of disappointment. Now, what this means going forward and how the team will kind of how things will unfold from a management perspective, again, remains to be seen. But as of now, it does seem like there is a more of an emphasis on size, on guys who not just size, but like size and speed as well. Big guys who can move, who like to go to the net, who play north-south, so it does seem like they're really starting to put, Tree Living's really starting to put his fingerprints on it, and, that's the just going away from the Shannon plan, going into Tree Living's plan, and, that's big. That's huge. It's a new direction for this team, and that absolutely counts as one of the defining moments of the summer. The next defining moment will come in at number 3 on our list, I think, is the extensions to both John Tavares and Matthew Nyes. Those are massive, Dave, and both for different reasons. John Tavares coming in 4-year extension at $4.38 million was such a sweetheart deal, such a hometown discount, which not many people expected him to take, especially not this big of a hometown discount. Like there was expectation that he'd sign somewhere, in the 5, maybe 6 million range, and he ended up signing 4.38 times 4. It worked out very well for the Maple Leafs. And so that's him. He took a team friendly deal, and then Matthew Nyes, just a really solid contract, a good bet on a young emerging player. Now you've got Matthew Nyes locked in 7 more years at $7.75 million. That could turn out to be a steal. So for me, when you look at, another defining moment for the summer for the Maple Leafs, getting those guys locked in at very good contracts, that was huge.
It was huge, and it was one of the few kind of times where Leafs fans were celebrating a contract being signed.
Yeah.
Like how often has a contract extension been signed and somebody we talk about, they didn't really give the team much of a break there. They took quite a, the Leafs gave more than they got, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not often do we say, wow, like he really decided to take some money off the table, right? To do the Leafs a favor. We hadn't seen throughout this entire Shannon plan. Like really, when we're talking about the Shannon plan, not once did it feel like a player decided, you know what? We really need to find a way to change things up, improve the roster. Maybe I need to take a bit of a make a little bit of a sacrifice, and that's what John Tavares did. And it kind of speaks to his what his desire is to win, right? And he's taken a lot of between giving up the captaincy, at times accepting a reduced role. He's shown that he's willing to sacrifice. And then the trickle down effect with Matthew Nyes, like, was it, did he get overpaid? No. Did he get underpaid? It could look that way if everything goes the way it's supposed to go with him, but it was just kind of a nice feeling to not have to see another contract being signed and you have to go, kind of wish it wasn't for that much. It was a nice little break from what we've been seeing the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely it was. And hopefully, again, we see more of these good contracts moving forward. So far, I think it's been a pretty solid track record for Brad Treliving when it comes to getting these extensions done. There have been a lot of them where it's like, wow, I don't know what the hell he's thinking there. Not that he's batting 1,000. I mean, I guess if I had to nitpick, like giving Max Domi that extension, I guess would be one that I probably would have preferred him didn't do. But outside of that, it's tough to find an extension that has fallen flat for Brad Treliving. But certainly Nyes and Tavares, getting them locked up, part of this team long term, definitely a good piece of business, especially considering the values of the deal. All right, we'll take one more break. Let's come back and get into the 4th and 5th most defining moments of the Maple Leaf summer. The list continues next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Want to make sure that we thank all of you everydayers for joining us each and every day on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Just a reminder, we are Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the next couple of weeks. Then we're back to every single day of the work week, Monday through Friday, starting in a couple of weeks' time. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You could also find us up on YouTube for that daily dose of Maple Leafs content each and every day. Continuing with the 5 defining moments of the summer for the Maple Leafs, trading for Michelli and Dakota Joshua. You know, when they got rid of Mitch Marner, that did leave a void on the wings, and they needed to find some way to replace Mitch Marner, and they did that, right? They did find a way to replace those somewhat those roles within the lineup, at least those roster spots, not necessarily the roster spots. And they bring in Michelli, who has an opportunity to play a top 9 role, who could really slot in potentially on the first line, second line. You know, maybe he's a third line guy, but he's a guy you definitely will have slot in and play, you know, an important role for this team, playing that playmaker role that Mitch Marner leaves behind, and then bringing in Dakota Joshua on a pretty good in a pretty good trade. Like Joshua's for a 2028 fourth round pick, Michelli a 2027 third round pick. So you add 2 guys who you believe you can add to your top 9, who adds you know, Michelli, you had a playmaking winger to somewhat replace Mitch Marner, some of the things he could do. And then, you know, you had an identity guy in Dakota Joshua who has familiarity with the coaching staff when they're in St. Louis together with Craig Berube, right? That's where Joshua began his NHL career and obviously broke out when he was in Vancouver last year, down season, but hoping to, you know, bounce back after, you know, missing the first little bit, recovering from his cancer battle. Now he's got a full season and a full off season. I think Dakota Joshua is going to be a good player for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, you know, they're going with depth as opposed to core 4. That's what Brad Treliving wants to do. He wants to make sure it's a deep team. And he took Mitch Marner's money, turned it into Nicola Waugh, turned it into Dakota Joshua, and turned it into Michelli. So bringing in those two players, Michelli and Dakota Joshua, definitely another defining moment here of this summer.
Just bringing in some new faces, right, and bringing in different types of players too. Like Dakota Joshua, again, another player that you talked about him. Craig Berube is going to love this player. Leafs fans are going to love this player, and Leafs opponents are going to hate this player. Leafs don't have, like, how many players on this team, right, do opponents hate to play against? Right, they don't like playing against the star players, but they hate playing against the players that are going to give that pushback, right?
Yeah,
And that's what
not
Dakota
many.
Joshua brings, right?
Yeah. There's not many. Like Nyes is probably working himself into that mix because he's, you know, big, strong, plays a lot of minutes, can score, is a pest in and around the net. Go Joshua can do a lot of those similar things. I don't think he's as gifted as Matthew Nyes, but he can kind of, you know, play a similar power forward role. That is the way that he plays. It is his game style. It's more suited on the third line than on the top line like Nyes, but definitely he brings that north-south game, and he can forecheck and little bit of hands. He does have some hands. Like you go and look at a couple of his like goal packs over the years, you can see that he's got a little bit of silk in those mitts, just a little bit. So he can score. He's got a nice touch. Had 18, I think, a couple of years ago in his breakout season. So I'm big on Dakota Joshua. I think that he'll be a great third liner for the Maple Leafs. And I think Michelli works his way into the top 6 here. You know, becomes a good playmaking option along the wing. So that was a massive move for Brad Treliving and the Maple Leafs, and barely gave up anything to get it done. Like you bring in Michelli and Dakota Joshua, you only gave up a 2027 third and a 2028 fourth. Sign me up. I'll do that all day long.
Yeah, I exactly. And this is where everyone's talking about, well, if you don't pay Mitch Marner, what are you going to use the money on? Well, yeah, you can now see a Dakota Joshua, a team like Vancouver. They made a bunch of signings. Dakota Joshua, they can't really afford to have a player like that.
Mm-hmm.
The Leafs, well, we're not paying Mitch Marner $12 million. Probably would have been more than $12 million. we can now add a Dakota Joshua. We can add a Matthias Michelli and not really worry. Like the Leafs have actually an abundance of players rather than how many times we talk about what they're going to have to do to be salary compliant to start the year. Now it's like, how do we deal with the fact that there's so many players on this roster that you're going to have to obviously make some tough choices during training camp, even look to make a trade just to free up not cap space, but roster space.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as of now, the Maple Leafs have 24 guys on their roster. So one of those players is going to have to get sent down. I mean, it could end up being, Michael Pezzetta. It could end up being Henry Thrun, I suppose. But as of now, one of those two are going to have to go down to the minors. But that does bring me to the fifth and final kind of defining moment of the summer, and that was kind of the curious case of Nick Robertson. Was he going to sign here? Were they going to trade him? Was he going to take this all the way to arbitration? And how is that whole thing going to unfold? Well, the day before arbitration, they're meeting. They come up with a contract. They get him signed to a very good deal. What was it 1.8 million? I want to say was the number there.
1.825, I think it was.
Yeah, 1.8 million, that range. This is a number that they're both comfortable with, and that's that. So we're gonna see what Nick Robertson could do with the Maple Leafs, making a decent amount of money. But it also kind of led to that conversation you were alluding to just a moment ago that dominated the summer about the abundance of bottom six forwards and the need to maybe move on from one of them. Like it could be Nick Robertson. It's very possible that he still could have a new home at some point. But maybe it's someone else, right? Maybe it is. Maybe it's a Bobby McMahon. Maybe it's a Cali Yarncroc, a David Camp, one of these guys. But that's kind of been like a subtopic that came with the Robertson extension. It's like, man, there's just too many bottom six players here. The Maple Leafs might have to do something before training camp. So that was another kind of defining moment and little subplot, I guess, of that for the Maple Leaf season. Nick Robertson and what happened with that situation.
Yeah, and I was actually talking with my uncle about, you look at a Nick Robertson, and there's a good opportunity for him either to establish himself with the Leafs or establish himself somewhere else, right? Like I still think there's that potential that he could be moved, but at the same time, the Leafs are like, we've got competition. There's jobs up, right? That he could still go for. I know we talk so much about where's his fit in the lineup. That's up to him to kind of establish where he fits, right?
Yeah.
And it's up to the coaching staff to also find a place that is going to work for him. But he's in that kind of interesting spot where, he can go out, he can produce, and the coaching staff has no choice but to play him, which would be a great storyline for him. Or the team just decides, especially if he's playing well enough and the teams are calling, let's just capitalize on the asset while we can, right? Because we talked so much about maybe it's just time to move on and take whatever team's going to offer. Well, I think the Leafs have kind of still believe that that's not the right case, because I'm sure there was opportunities to trade him, and they probably felt like just to try not to sell too low. I mean, you're not going to get what you gave up to get a Nick Robertson, a second round pick. You're not getting that.
No,
but maybe they feel like
they get a fourth round pick and replace, like Dakota Joshua, let's say, replace the pick that they sent out for Joshua. I think you're happy.
Yeah.
I think you're happy with that deal.
Yeah.
We'll see, man. Like I still expect to see a trade at some point here before training camp or early into camp. Do you not? Like there's just no way that they could possibly go into the season with all of these players. And I get it, injury is going to happen. You're going to want to have depth, which is the counter argument to this. But I don't know. Like I just feel like there is definitely a trade that still is out there that would make a lot of people happy. Who it is, what it is, I don't know, but I'd be shocked if we get through camp and we get down to cut down day and there has not been some sort of move where one of these bottom 6 players has been shipped out.
Yeah, I'm just kind of waiting for when it's going to come down. I think there is a move to be made. We still even don't even know what's going on with Jack Roslovic, right? Like we still think that
Yeah.
he's
Yeah, and
he
they
has
might
his
add
time.
another one into the mix. That's right.
Like he could be. He's
Do you think he
obviously
comes on
waiting
a
for.
PTO? Is he gonna be this year's PTO?
I
Like, is it
think.
sounding like that? Like for the last few years, like the Leafs have brought someone in on PTO and have ended up signing them.
Yeah, Steven
Um,
Lorentz being the kind of the prime guy, right?
Lorenz, Pacioretty, I think what Zach Aston Reese did it a couple of
Yep.
years ago when he came back on a PTO, and there's a little kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, yeah, you'll get a contract when it's all said and done. So like it's not uncommon for the Maple Leafs to do this. So maybe if they do still have interest in a guy like that, maybe that's how they get it done. Um, I'd be shocked if no other team is interested, but hey, maybe they're offering, hey, maybe there's a spot in the top 6 for you, potentially, right?
Mm.
Yeah, play next to your old buddy Austin Matthews, maybe. We'll see. We'll see what happens
Yeah.
there. All right, buddy. That'll do it. All right. So the 5 defining moments of the Maple Leaf summer. Again, top moment. The Mitch Marner saga being traded from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Number 2, Brendan Shanahan fired from the Toronto Maple Leafs and was not replaced. His role will not be replaced. That was a big moment and story as well. The Nyes and Tavares extensions comes in at number 3. Trading for Matthias Michelli and Dakota Joshua comes in at number 4. And then the Nick Robertson arbitration case and his subsequent signing, which led to the conversation about an abundance of bottom 6 forwards, which we talked about ad nauseum throughout the course of this offseason. So hopefully something can happen over the next couple of weeks and we could get our wish and one of those players find themselves elsewhere. So there it is. That's the list, the 5 defining moments of the Maple Leaf summer. It's crazy, man. The summer was way too quick and hockey is just around the corner. But really fun episode. I was glad to kind of look back and give us a nice refresher on what happened with the Buds.
It's a good refresher, and there's only going to be more to kind of. I'm sure there's going to be more that we can look back on as the season goes along, but yeah, pretty busy considering, right? Even with the Marner thing kind of dominating things, it's easy to lose track of all the other things that were kind of lost in the shuffle through the offseason.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It was a busy offseason for the Buds, and we'll see what this season has in store for them. Still a couple more weeks to iron some things out before they get going for training camp. As you noted, there will be some details about the rookie tournaments, which will be underway shortly around the league, including with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we'll get that information out to you guys as soon as we know it. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. You can find us on Instagram as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Wednesday. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.